bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, by all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop, and you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at flips.com, the number one.
Big time to Iran. According to Brooks Agnew, the authorities. I'm trying to use words which are correct. The bad guys in Iran are also Khazarian mafia types, or as Cliff High calls them. Cliff High's been doing interesting work.
Radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing.
We gotta stop them! They're gonna kill us all! See how the trouble you've started? Be they the government, be they industry, be they organized labor, be they anyone, or human being. Time when the operation of the machine becomes so odious, makes you so sick at heart that you can't take part. You can't even passively take part. And you've got to put your bodies upon the gears and upon the wheels, upon the levers, by all the apparatus, and you've got to make it stop. And you've got to indicate to the people who run it, to the people who own it, that unless you're free, the machine will be prevented from working at all.
Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com, the number one listener-supported talk radio station, throwing ourselves upon the gears of the machine. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
You called down the thunder, well now you got it.
Right, you tell them I'm coming, and hell's coming with me, you hear? Hell's coming with me!
Revolution Radio.
Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age Conversations covers changes in our climate due to a new and intensifying grand solar minimum. In the media, overlooking, downplaying, or burying cold weather changes occurring on our planet. This is in order to keep the global warming agenda steaming full speed ahead. I do this podcast and radio program because we need to begin conversations on how to adapt our food growing strategies long before 2030 as agricultural zones shift, affecting global crop output, but very few mainstream media outlets are talking about the most important issue of our time, cold weather crop losses. Our sun is going through a 400-year cycle, which has effects on our weather patterns as our magnetosphere weakens and the jet streams go out of flow. It's not CO2, it's not you, it's the sun. Are you ready to thrive in the grand solar minimum? Then join me for Mini Ice Age Conversations. I'm your host, David Dubine, creator of the Adapt 2030 Mini Ice Age 2015 to 2035 video series. And I do welcome you this evening, this morning, this afternoon, wherever you are on this beautiful blue planet. Tonight we're streaming also on Rumble, Adapt 2030 channel, and Ransom Godwin 420 TV Freedomist Films speaking with me tonight on his YouTube channel as well. Multiple platforms. The information is so important for us to spread, share, start the conversation. And I saw in a stunning speech, Peter Thiel blast Buffett, Diamond, and Fink as finance gerontocracy. Seeing Bitcoin rising 100x from here. What? Gold confiscation. You know, I mean, these are the types of things that you're finding if you're just surfing any types of normal news, at least in the sphere of my world. Rising crop prices, fertilizer prices up, farm inputs up. So what do you think that's going to do to the things we eat? And see, this is the important part that we all need to talk about. Okay, we can talk about the problems all day long. There's a million of them out there. It's nice to frame them, but we need solutions. And where we're going right now is there's going to be a massive difficulty with food coming within the next few months. For sure, at the end of the summer. we're going to start to see things that we never thought were possible happen on this planet. You know, when you put armed military in supermarkets to prevent flash mobs and people stealing because they're so hungry, and I envision that in the United States in the harvest season of this year, which is just after the end of this summer. That's where it's going from here to now to there. And we're going to try to take you on the journey to describe what's happening and where we see, you know, the next month or next 2 months going out, because it's going to happen in 3 stages here. So as we start to expand on different platforms with Ransom Godwin from 420 TV, Freedomist Films, and myself, we're going to take this to the moon and beyond to Jupiter and beyond and out to Pluto and over to the next stars where we're going. We're going to jump to the next spiral arm of our galaxy. That's how far we want to take the message. 3 different distinct phases that are going to happen from now until harvest season. First, in May, there's going to be a realization about fertilizer and herbicide shortages, what's not going to come out of the Black Sea, what Kyrgyzstan's not exporting, and what all these measures and sanctions have done to disrupt global trades, specifically farm inputs. And then, you know, we're going to come into the middle of the summer in July, August, and they're going to do crop tours around the U.S. and different parts of the Northern Hemisphere. And they're going to look at far and wide and see hardly anything growing in the fields. And that's going to spook markets. But then we're going to come into the real deal here at the end of the year. So between now and then, how can you protect yourself? Well, finance, you know, and I'm going to ask Ransom, you know, Ransom, if you think different ways to protect yourself, I'm going to say, all right, grow your own food, obviously food, water, and security. But then, you know, finance is going to be something like what are there other ways that people can protect themselves as we move into these, I don't know, unknown times? The most change in 2,000 years is going to happen in the next 7 months.
I think everybody's got to catch up on trends right now of what's not going to be available. It's not just like what you have, but what you're going to need in the future, like especially if you have children or whatnot. Thinking long term is something that people are going to have to really think about hard, because from what I see, they're really cutting services off as far as any real benefit from them, like as far as medical. And of course, I know that people have like food stamps, but we all know that that's going to end, and that only provides a right now meal anyway. I would, like we've talked about before, is invest in tools, and not only that, but you know, utensils of different kinds that will help you do things on your own. And not just that, but you have to make it where you yourself know all about the product that you get, so that you could repair it yourself. And I think we're in a time where people need to rediscover knowledge and the how-to mentality. It wasn't really, I think, in the 90s, you know, it was a big deal. You remember all the commercials from Home Depot and Ace Hardware and all of that stuff about do it yourself. You notice you don't really see much of that anymore. It's more just like holiday tool sales of useless trinkets and stuff. They don't really, you know, kind of push the idea of you being able to fix your own stuff, because they make lines of products now that are, they change it every so often. So you can't just go buy the same thing and replace it with no problems. You always have to alter everything. So I would look into right now, like buying backups to your backups in your house, as far as things that commonly break, like faucets, pipes, and etc., stuff like that. And if you have those on hand, you know, when the time comes when things freeze or they break or they stop functioning, you won't have an emergency, or, you know, your life doesn't have to stop production, because you'll already have the things that you pretty much need. So I have a habit of buying things in 2s or 3s, because I know things break. And also, if it's a good product, you always have spare parts. If one does break, you move on to a new one that you already have. And then in the future, if that breaks, you also have the opportunity to have the same product to fix it. That's just one thing that I thought of right off the top of my head, because this is a problem that I already face now. I've replaced a lot of water outlets for the yard and different things because they froze and broke, and inside showers that were corroded. And what I found is that I couldn't just go buy a replacement for the thing that was there, like I always was used to doing. I could just go to the hardware store. They're going to have an exact fitting, the exact size, and I just go and I put it, with the little plumber's tape and some glue, and I'm good. But that's not how it is anymore. They have all new products. The products are different dimensions, different sizes, and they're actually kind of the stuff that they sell now is built to break. So even looking into finding older equipment of things that you're going to use a lot of, I've been trying to find me like some of the older style steam cookers and stuff so that you can preserve your foods in the mason jars by pressure cooking, excuse me, not steam cooker, pressure cookers. I have one, and I wanted to find some of those older ones that are bigger. I know you can make it, but there's plenty of this useless stuff out there at thrift stores and different things that people just don't do anymore, and they really don't even know what to do with it. Like, not too many people will steam a big giant thing of rice anymore at home. And then you have on top of that, like political things that are trying to push you away from certain products and certain lifestyles that'll make everything easy for you.
Yeah, and that would bring us back to simple woodworking and simple pipe fitting. How many people have the skill of even those two basic things? Having this, how many people have the skill of even those two basic continually fixing things? I was such a novice older log cabin, a year and a half, 2 years ago, about fixing things and really, getting out. I was such a novice older log more powerful saws and got 6 different kind of lengths of screws and nails as well, 6, 7 types, and because they're all needed for different things and all the, got 6, like even knowing the board size screws and to be able to, make because they're all needed for different things, a railing, making some sort of border for something else to fit into, or to be able to frame of something, make these are all skill sets we totally railing, making I'll tell you a border for something else to fit into, or Tennessee countryside, farm country story for today. What is it, Thursday? Well, we were going over to Tennessee Farm Co-op in our local area because it's supposed to freeze again tomorrow night. It might even snow here, and it's going to be under freezing for 2 nights in a row. Over to Tennessee Farm Co-op. We already planted a bunch of stuff to merge. We bought a bunch of starters from the Amish farm, and they're out. So we had to go get row covers across 2 nights in a row covers, and put it over in the protected plants. Ours down there, we bought a bunch of starters. It's good. It's not going to get any cooler. We had to go get. Anyway, we're going up there and we pass one of our friends who sells eggs out of their farm. They got a bunch of chickens and they get about a dozen a day. We stopped in and we said, "Hey, how's it going?" And hadn't talked in a while. And we passed. And she said that during these massive winds that I also experienced, I had an enormous amount of trees fall down. Well, they did it their place too. They're about a mile down the road. A big massive white oak came down. Huge white oak. During these massive winds, they didn't know exactly what to do with it. So they got a hold of Amish guys who do woodworking, and they all came by their property. And, the people that I bought the eggs from, they have a tractor, and then they pulled the log the best they could up the hill, and they cut it all to board and then gave them some board back. They took the tree, and days later they came back and gave them board feet of wood that they cut out of the tree. Now, obviously, it's not cured, and it could buckle and could bend, if it's not cured correctly, but can you make a board out of a tree? But then my question would be, we've got 8 billion people on the planet, a huge amount of stuff for 8 billion people, and several billion are going to pass away here. So there should be more stuff just laying around that's already fit for you. Like, would I cut a 2x4 out of a pine tree if I could just find one on a disused house somewhere? Disassemble the house? But again, here, this is simple stuff. We built things also like a vegetable rack and a shoe rack and different things made out of pallets, shipping pallets, the wood on that. Now, just to take those apart is a Rubik's Cube of not breaking the wood, so you can still reuse it, and you get a few reusable nails, and can you pound the nail? Can you pound the nails straight to reuse those again? You know, and just taking apart a pallet so you can get the pieces of wood to then construct something. I mean, going down to that simple level, like if you put a pallet in front of somebody with a crowbar and a couple hammers and whatnot, would they be able to, with a handsaw, create something else out of it usable in your life, like you say, in your home? If it breaks, you got to fix it. I don't know. These are the kind of things that I've been going through and have lived so far, you know, just out here trying to keep the farm going, not out of necessity, out of not wanting to pay massive amounts of money in a furniture store when I could make something myself or order it online. You know, we built thousands of dollars worth of furniture out here, not furniture, but, you know, storage bins and shoe racks and book racks and vegetable holders and vegetable containers and all these types of things. We're at that point now where you're going to have to know that just because that's the way it's going to move. And I'm so happy and thankful and grateful that I've already moved through this, and I'm really confident now more building wood. You know, could I construct a house? No, but I could sure help. And see, that's the thing, like the skills that we're going to need. Maybe you don't need to be an expert at it, but I sure know enough. If you're going to build a house, I'm going to be there because I got enough skill to help you nail, screw, hold, cut, whatever it is, measure. I can get on site and be like, I know enough to be dangerous, and I will definitely help you. So I don't know. Basic woodworking and, you know, pipe fitting too. Can anybody cut a pipe? We had to fix stuff with PEX pipe underground. Like, you know, and I'll say one last thing, Ransom. I know I'm rambling here, but a skill also that you're going to need to know is how to secure a faucet underground, because we have a lever faucet, but, you know, after going up and down, up and down, up and down, up and down hundreds of times, the pipe underground broke because it wasn't anchored tightly enough. So that's going to be another skill. And then we had like old pipe and we had to get it connected with PEX, you know, and that stuff's expensive too. The couplers, those PEX couplers, damn, those are expensive. You know, there's just a huge amount of things to learn because you're not going to be able to call somebody and say, hey, come out and help. You're going to be OJT and doing the fixing yourself. And the longer it takes to fix, the longer you're waiting for something else to happen. So time to get back to pioneering lifestyle. You're at Ransom. What are you thinking?
That's pretty much what I'm counting on right now. I'm trying to do that in an urban environment right now. And it's funny that you said that about the put anchoring it down there, because I just got one of those pump looking faucets, the big iron ones, to replace the one that broke underground. And when I was down there, I realized, you know, that thing was so heavy on the PVC pipe that's standard for all of the underground work that I had to, you know, build basically a big rock column and then fill it with this desert dirt that's pretty much like concrete so that it wouldn't move or wiggle.
That's right. Exactly, no moving, like no wiggling.
Yeah, because that'll just work it over time and mess it up. So we are live on the Rumble channel. Although something happened with me logging in with the software, so I'm not on my channel, but I didn't want to stop the stream. So we're just on Rumble tonight. And you got some chat going in there already. And I told them to share the link there for people that want to watch on Rumble.
Yeah, we're trying this to expand out to a few different venues every single evening while we're broadcasting here.
So I made a little boo-boo on the streaming stuff, but I didn't want to restart the stream on Rumble, so I'll make sure I got it right next time. Basically, it was just a login issue, so I think we'll have that up and running on multiple platforms by next week. That ought to be really cool. And I was trying to tell the audience because I was logged into Rumble that I'm not you, because I realized it said Adapt 2030 when I was talking, so that's actually not him, that's me. But we'll straighten that out too later.
Well, it's just good to, you know, like I say, it's about getting the message out, because it's come to the point where in the beginning of the channel, I was always talking about the weather events that were proving that we were moving into this beginning of the cycle of this grand solar minimum. And it seems like it's a much more powerful cycle this time. There's other elements inside it versus just having the sun going into lower activity. Magnetic field weakens a little bit, jet streams go out of flow. cloud cells move to different positions and collide in the sky. Okay, that's one thing that always happens, but this seems to be way more powerful. And, I talked about that for a while up to these food shortages, but now, you know what? We're at the point where it's really too late to even try to look for the changes anymore because they're ongoing. But now it's the economic changes and how you're going to see your way through monetarily to be able to buy things you need to stay alive during these next few months, transitioning into, hyperinflationary food prices, doubling in a day like happened in Peru, non-availability, tripling of prices. These are things that have upset society through antiquity. And we're here again. And there are going to be those three distinct phases. Look for May, look for August, look for October. Like those months are going to be massive, massive months. So it's past the time to look at the weather anymore, or the climate, or the shifts. I do like looking at this, red sprites and blue jets and halos in the sky at the upper atmosphere at 100 miles above at the tip of the ionosphere, connecting back to space. Love that stuff. And that's, that was to prove that we're at the cycle. But, with the economic collapse coming in the beginning of this cycle, it's also super incredibly important to be able to have a means to get the things you need to get through these next, 8 months or so. And I don't know, it's gonna be an interesting time. I don't know if everybody's ready. Even the basic skills, like you said, you're gonna need. And if a lot of people aren't even thinking about the breaking pipe, but that is so important for irrigation to keep your crops alive, keep your food alive. If you don't have proper irrigation, and then do you have a timer? Because that could speed things up. If I turn my timer on for 30 minutes and I know I only want to water plants for that, I can walk away. And then 30 minutes later, it will just turn itself off. Like automatic turn, what's the automatic start time? So you don't even have to be there. It'll still water for you if you're gone. Like to automate something in a super simple fashion, because you got to get more productivity out of a smaller area now and be more efficient. So even having a timer will nearly double your productivity coming out, because you can water it at the best time of the day, at the optimal time of the day, every single time. You'll never miss a beat. You'll never miss a minute. You'll never be 20 minutes too late. It'll always be right on time. So just having the proper water flow into your plants. Then what about you for drinking and bathing? And then it goes levels deep. Like what about the sanitation? If you're living in a neighborhood or something, even if you're on a 1 acre plot in a neighborhood and 4 people are living at the home, how are you going to get rid of the waste if nothing else is working? Like the sanitation, the water's turned off in the city, these kind of things. Simple water, you could go through a whole list, and I'm not sure, Ransom, where that list would end or start, but how many things could there be in a lifestyle where we're going to need to be more self-sufficient?
And you said that's like hitting the nail on the head right there when you're talking about sanitation, because let's be real. If you live anywhere in an urban environment, once the water's shut off, you need to be leaving before that, honestly, and have some place to go. Because I've actually put a lot of thought into this, because I am growing a lot of food right here on my property from the nature, unless it's just a great year, because I happen to live in the desert. But the sanitation part, can you imagine all of these people that are going to be trying to use their plumbing, thinking that they're just going to turn it on and whatnot? Problems are going to be created really quick with that, as far as disease, smell, and other things. And I'm lucky I live in the desert. I can go out there and dig a hole and get rid of, my bag of waste. But if you imagine, 50,000 people in the same city, all trying to get rid of their waste, you kind of, quickly realize that if there's food shortages and sanitation problems, all of this is something that you're probably not going to want to deal with unless you have a really good plan. Like what is a plan to get rid of waste if you're stuck in the urban environment when everything turns off? You'd have to have containers, and even those have a limit on the time that you're going to be able to hang out at a certain location. If you don't really live in the woods or have some country farmland that you can, move around an outhouse or something like that, you're really in big trouble, because this will pile up and create all kinds of problems. And people will be getting dysentery, and just the whole idea of, I don't want to say like a SHI, show, but that's exactly what it'll be. And there'll be people sick. People aren't going to want to stay in their homes anymore because of that reason, because they used it, and they kept trying to use it thinking that everything's going to be okay. And as we've seen in the recent past, tornadoes, hurricanes, etc. It doesn't matter what it is, a power down of the grid. After a while, sanitation is going to become such an issue that if you don't have basically a go plan, not just a go bag or all of that set, you need a go plan to go somewhere to retreat, where you also have resources. And if things get bad, like they could possibly turn, and it's not too far-fetched to think that when you have the president talking about food shortages, and you got all of these other people talking about it, the reduction of food being grown. You can pretty much think that it's a much higher probability that some kind of infrastructure shutdown will happen in the near future. And then that's when you get back to this. What are you really going to do with your waste? Do you have enough water to actually grow enough food to live there? These are some very important questions. And if the answer is no to these things, you need a backup plan, and you need somewhere else to go. Like I said, you need a go plan. Also, not just a go bag. Now, I know a lot of people that live in rural areas won't have to deal with this kind of thing right away, but if you aren't prepared for it, it can become just as disgusting if you're trying to do things around your house in a way that's not proper.
Yeah, and think about, I'm going to take it a step further with the water here. Microbes and sickness. And do you have the simple meds if somebody were to get sick from contaminated water to take care of them so they could get better, to still help you back on whatever tasks you need? Fill in the blank. Extra hands are going to make it so much easier than trying to do anything alone. And having horses will be much better than doing it by hand, but if you add motor fuels or gasoline to have a motor to do something's better than horse. So trace it back if things disappear. But to the water, do you have the meds to get somebody better if they get sick from it? And that's a thing not a lot of people are thinking about. Where do you go with water contamination? I mean, every time you see, how many hundreds or thousands of times have we seen it just on our own planet in the last 10 years? Something happens with water, could be conflict, could be a shutdown, power outage, whatever, and just massive amounts of people really end up getting sick, especially after, bombings into water treatment facilities and whatnot in some of these nations. I mean, geez, all to protect a dollar, making people sick all over the place from the water. See, if you were in some of these nations like Iraq or Syria or, again, fill in the blank, Sudan, South Sudan, what are you doing for water? I mean, how many people get sick to the point of not even being able to work, and then it becomes a burden on everybody else? Because now 4 hands are trying to feed another, and then they're trying to make up for what's lost from the extra person. So, medical kit, basic meds. I mean, can you think about grapefruit seed extract and what happens if you get dysentery, or what happens if you get an amoeba in the stomach? Because what if somebody starts to drink stream water and they suddenly end up with parasites or amoebas in them from fresh water coming off of a mountain that you might go, wow, the stream looks really clean. But you didn't know up there were cows or there were wild animals, and you drank some of that water. It looked really clean. It's in the mountain, but there's other contaminants up there too. End up getting sick. I mean, you're going to get taken down if you get parasites or dysentery or some kind of contaminated water. Even if you just get plate up diarrhea, that's going to take you down. You'll be so dehydrated, so weak that others will have to take care of you. Just at the very basic, just getting like grumbly belly. What's that belly they call you go down to Mexico and it's just about getting sick from the water? Same thing.
Montezuma's
Montezuma's revenge. Thank you. Hey, You could you hijack their culture.
That's messed up. But we're talking about this like maybe and could, and a lot of people probably in the States and other more secure places think, yeah, well, that's probably not going to happen. And but right now, you could look at this headline right here from China, from BBC News. They're already doing more lockdowns with supposed new viruses. And you can see right here that the residents are already running out of food, and they basically just started the lockdown. So they already are having more COVID camps in China, if that's what you want to call them. And they're saying that it's now the city's biggest ever COVID outbreak. So if you know how these governments work together, and you can tell that ours seems to be doing some weird stuff with China as far as the WHO and other things, you can kind of see the scenario that they're about to push on us right now. They're coupling war with, supply chain distribution problems that were already happening before the COVID. It was already lining up to do this. The dollar seems like it's about to pop, and especially with when you consider all of these OPEC countries now starting to want to do new negotiations with maybe Russia with rubles. You can see the rubles skyrocketing. So now we have a competitor money all at the same time as it seems we're about to try to give the world a new lockdown. So you can think of a lockdown that's telling you can't go nowhere, but then if you can go to the store, you get down there and they just really don't have anything. And then people will be wondering why they threw out all those Russian turnips and vodka and stuff when they could have been using it during the food shortage. Just a joke there. It's not really that funny, but
no, not a joke. You too woke.
Yeah, well, think about how the idiocy of throwing away resources, regardless of where they come from. I remember you brought up a point one time when we were looking at an article about them pouring out vodka, as look at all of that antiseptic and medicine that they're just throwing away for nothing. And you can imagine being in a situation where you actually got hurt, and you don't have anything else but something that's like pure grain alcohol or vodka or something to clean the wound. That right there is a money resource. If you have a liquor closet full of liquor, especially these high content stuff, you're going to be, in a good position to trade for food or other resources, just because people will need it for medicinal values, regardless of the people that just want to get a buzz on, when things are rough. But right here, you can see it 18 hours ago, Shanghai, residents running out of food in their new COVID lockdown, and they're showing this truck with bags of groceries that I guess they're giving people. And this shows you how it's real simple to convert someone over from the idea of feeling free and feeling like they have things covered because they get to go to the grocery store and they stock up, to a truck pulls up and the government's giving you a bag with some half-rotten vegetables and saying good luck.
You're being fed like a farmed animal. Or a pet if it was good food. But how fast do you think this collapse would happen might be one of the things to think about. I mean, talk about COVID, okay. It took about, I would say, a good 2.5 months to sweep around the planet from when it was first noticed over in China until, every place on the planet was feeling the effects, lockdown, whatnot. Well, what we're seeing now with the Russia thing, and the food embargoes and the food rationing happening across the planet, it's only taken up 10 days approximately now since when the first nations were saying, oh, we're going to have to, ration things, limit things, whatnot. It's been about 10, 11 days now, but it seems to have swept the world in that short period of time. So now if we're going to compare the COVID disruptions of 2.5 months for everything to sweep the planet, but this newest thing, I'll even be generous and say 2 weeks. That's an exponential increase in speed of whatever is going to, go down here with, you're right. I do think it might be planned, the whole lockdown China even more because they can, and then create supply disruptions over here or there or everywhere because they can. It seems like it's a purposeful disruption and a purposeful collapse, but, that's my 2 cents on that. But let me get a list of what do you think the highest grain alcohol would be? 151 rum for sure. Everclear? And do you have a still so you can make your own alcohols? Because then you can take it to whatever proof you want to at that point.
Yeah, you definitely need some PGA, and I don't know how to do that at all. So that's like another thing for people that have that talent of being able to brew things. They're ahead of the game, not only on fuel and aseptic and just barter. It's big time barter with anybody. And I'm showing the audience these pictures in China. They have people at these facilities, doing their hygiene, and it's just really disgusting to think that they're going to try to pull this again on the world. And you can see all these people lining up for new vaccines and new checks to make sure that they're not sick, and they already have it locked down. So how long did that take in China? I don't think it would take much longer here if that's, the grocery stores are empty. At the same time, they're telling you, hey, we're going to have to stop traveling again. And it'll be different this time because the gas prices are skyrocketed. Now, last time when they shut everything down, a lot of Americans just wanted to do what they were going to do anyway, and they went ahead and traveled, and the gas was super cheap. I was driving all over the U.S. I was visiting people, checking out their farms, doing work here and there. If you tried to do that now, that's just about impossible. I mean, you just couldn't afford the gas to do some of these things. And think about all of the events and different things that still are kind of shut down unofficially. They lifted the mandates, but they did the gasoline, emergency, if you want to call it that, just in a timely manner, so that right when most of the lockdowns shut down and the country started to open up, hey, well, you know what, you still can't go nowhere because it costs too much to do anything. And by the way, guess who's also paying those high prices is all the people that deliver all of the products that you enjoy, especially the food. And, I've seen article after article about talking about how it was a mistake to change over most of these corn farms to making ethanol because, we could use that corn for real food and real feed for livestock, but instead it's going to make fuel. And at the same time, you're rolling up to the gas station looking at these prices and thinking, well, what's going on here? Where's all of this extra, ethanol that they were supposed to help us all out with all of this time? It doesn't really seem to be helping as far as the economy and being able to do anything at this point. But it does mean millions and millions and millions of tons of food are not going to be eaten by livestock and people because, it's all GMO and turned into fuel. When are they going to release that where it's actually usable as far as for the consumer to get around cheap? Supposedly they've been doing it all this time, and if you've been paying attention, it really hasn't changed much as far as gasoline prices.
Yeah, I think we talked about this last week, but prohibition in part was to stop farmers from creating their own fuels by using stills and fermenting corn and creating sour mash and then getting their what you consider quote unquote moonshine. That's just a generic term for, homemade liquor that's not taxed. That's basically the definition, not taxed. But now, the moonshine makers, quote unquote, but now they're branding moonshine and they're paying the tax, but they're calling it moonshine. But the original version of moonshine was somebody who had a farm or was in a farming community, brewed up their own, did their own sour mash, made their own alcohol, but then they drove around for free because they didn't have to buy the fuels. And again, the tooling of the engines was very different back then compared to now. But, when you think about fuels, this ethanol stuff, here's my question on a percentage wise. We use about 11% or so of American farmland to produce ethanol. And you're right, it's a GMO crop. They can change it as much as they want to get the highest sugar content to make the best ethanol. But that land is going to, I think, be forced to convert over to food production land, which would mean then they can run with it again even longer on the narrative of, oh, we just lost our ethanol source. Oh, your fuel needs to go up because we have to go back to 100% oil gasoline. Because, E15 or E85 is 15% ethanol in the fuel. But then, how many ways can they spin the narrative of, oh, we don't have the ethanol, your fuel's got to go up, and oh, we don't have the ethanol, oh, there's a shortage, oh, there's not enough ethanol, now there is rationing.
And what about the droughts? Is it weird that all through the news all of a sudden we're really hammering the droughts too? Because I've seen at least 6 different articles. So you point out all of these things constantly about grain production overseas and how that affects us. But when you look right here in the U.S., all of these things are happening right now for the perfect scenario for the storage to be empty. And I think what's going on right now is the major corporations, the food chains know this is coming, and they're peddling out the regular stuff that they've been doing, but somewhere they have inventory that's cans of stuff. This is the stuff that they're going to milk, and they're going to increase the prices so that their store has a little stock, but it's all of the older stuff. But I'm seeing articles like this one: the Texas drought is the worst in years. Are we on the brink of widespread disaster? And they're talking about both not bringing in crops, but also wildfires, affecting the area, which may or may not be a good thing, I guess, for the long term. But in the short term, it would burn all kinds of fields that are growing stuff. And hey, guess what? On either side of these growing lanes, if you've ever got a chance to check out Texas, you'll see these big swaths of food production, and on either side of that is a big stripe of fracking. So they have it completely surrounded on the aquifer with fracking, and then they're growing the main foods right there in between it. So I think what happens when the groundwater starts to get contaminated in the future. Some of these places won't be so growable as they are right now.
Yeah, and you have to look at, and if you're going to terraform a planet, or you're going to remove a species off the planet, as in invaded ED, would you not try to remove the water source from the species that requires that fresh water to live? And would you not inject something into the water that your species needed to live, so you can start to overtake the water supply on the planet, even at the depths down in the aquifers? Because you got to be planning it out. Now, maybe this, if there were some sort of invasion of non-human entity, would it be today that where, the movies look, there's, lasers blasting through the air from advanced craft, or would you do it over a 1,000-year period? Because water is the most important thing. And, this whole fracking is a little off the hook here of the known damage through the different layers that then contaminate freshwater sources. But it still continues unabated. Now that oil prices is back up high enough, even where they're going to start the tar sands in Alberta once again. Now, tar sands is a different animal as well. It's only viable when oil's, above $80 or $85 consistently a barrel. What they do is they dig out giant scoops of sand mixed with oil. It's not an oil field that runs. It's not that liquid, but it's the same oil that's mixed with sand in kind of a tar format, where if there was an oil spill on a beach, that type of oil mixed with the sand, but over, 50 square miles or something like this. Even larger, but it gets down into less reserves further out. And they just take a scoop out, and then they put it in these specialized boiling vats of water, and the sand sinks to the bottom, and then the oil rises to the top, and then they skim that off. It actually oozes out, and it's a separator that vibrates, and the oil oozes out off of a large plate that then heats it a little bit warmer, and then other residues fall off and get filtered. Tar sands is back up again, and so is fracking, because it's viable at a certain price point on oil. But the damage that's being done to the water supply during this very important time that we need to use wells again. Like, you got to think, how many wells are going to be refurbished and brought back online again during this period? Because I had a neighbor who bought some property here. That well had not been used since 1960, but he brought it back online again, and it was as good as new after they got some flow out of it. Because out here, there's not so much shale fracking here in Tennessee. There are in certain locations, but where we specifically are, very little gas reserves, and you're going down 3,000 plus feet to even get just like something that's barely usable. It's not worth it on the ROI for a lot of companies. So think about the damaged water, and think about how water is going to be one of the most valuable commodities on the planet moving forward. Your access to it, if the electricity goes off, you will be on your knees praying that you know somebody that has a spring-fed source of fresh water. I don't know. The place where we're going in these next few months, it's going to require back to the basics again, the security, then the water, then the food. So how do we achieve all that? Only certain pockets would be able to make it through it. The highest density population areas, I don't know how they're going to work together. I honestly don't think they can. And I think they would be more rounded up into cities like we see in China, and just what you're seeing when you started the program with, of them being forced into buildings and then just food is brought by and then give it to them. That's kind of the vision of you own nothing and you'll be happy. But then you've got a social credit system, and it seems like this whole thing is what we're seeing in China is where we're going in a couple of years because of food shortages across the Western world. It's a very interesting time to be alive, and I'm super excited that I get to experience all of it. But at the same time, it's such a bizarre time in the world that people can't see through the illusion. It's so clear that you can see through it like you're looking through a pane of glass. But the mind is bringing people back to distort the reality because they can't deal with the changes. And it's really, you can see the cycle inbound is here. And now we're watching governments react to the natural cycle that will limit food production globally. And then it's going to cascade with everything else, fertilizer shortage, herbicide shortages, embargoes, and these types of things. So, hey, man, I'm glad to be alive. Happy Thursday.
Right, happy Thursday. I was looking at this article from the Sun, and it makes me think of before when the last wave of COVID went through, about how many politicians all of a sudden got COVID. And now there's supposedly another wave through Congress, and this article is talking about Nancy Pelosi and her health battle at 82 as she tests positive for it. And remember, all of these people were completely medicated, allegedly, to prevent this from happening. But how wonderful it is, right when everything starts falling apart, guess how many of these people will be available to hold responsible? None of them. They'll either be where you can't get to them because the government buildings are closed and they no longer have like town meetings and things like this. So you don't get to approach them, but also they can also say that they're just not there. They're not doing anything because they're all sick. What a nice time for them all to duck out. And if you remember, I think it was maybe more than a year ago, we were talking about the guy from New York, Como, and he was having all of these problems, with the nursing homes. And I remember mentioning it. Don't worry about it. He'll have some kind of scandal and he'll just disappear. And that's exactly what happened. He had supposedly a romantic, issue with his life where he couldn't figure that out or whatever. But it was just a big distraction so that he could just run off in the sunset after the things that happened with management of the last pandemic closures, what they were doing. And he just got to skate off without any justice. And you can kind of see this same scenario with the people that are in charge right now. All the main faces that you're used to are all of a sudden going to either retire, have health problems, or, they'll get COVID. And then all of a sudden, none of these people that are supposedly responsible for the world-changing events that are happening right now will be around for the repercussions or the blame. You'll have a bunch of new people with the new system, and you won't even be able to point out, what you think are bad things that any particular leader or politician did, because they won't be there anymore. they'll all skate off in the sunset. So I just thought that it was ironic at the time that we're going in with all these other, issues happening, that it's just the right time for these politicians that you know and love to skate off in the sunset with either a scandal or, they just got sick or they retire or whatever. So there's no one to hold the feet to the fire. And I think that's going to happen for all of these countries that have recently had big, societal makeovers. What do you think about that? Do you think that's, and even the royal family has been putting out, I guess you could call it propaganda, that they're about to, like abdicate the throne and kind of go back into the private sector and give up the royal lifestyle as far as the public. But guess what they run off with is a state secrets amount of gold. And that's pretty much what these politicians are doing. They keep giving themselves raises, and they made it where insider trading for them is okay, but not for you. And what they're basically doing is, stealing all the remaining wealth and running, because they are the ones that are sinking the ship. And they don't want to be around whenever there's long lines at the food store. Because in recent times, you've seen some of the public has caught up with some politicians at their homes. And I think that they know that. And that's exactly why they're trying to get out of the limelight. Like, right, what do you think about that? Do you really believe that there's, all of these outbreaks with the people with the best medical care on the planet?
No, in my personal opinion, now I could be wrong, but I'm just going to say from my own opinion here that I agree. The amount of excuses for the highest levels of individuals on the planet that have carried out this agenda to bring us to this point right now, with the reset of the currency, the restructuring of governments, the revaluation of what is value in money and currency and assets across the planet right now, they've all done their part. So they're getting that golden parachute, every single one of them. Doesn't matter where you look, everybody's bailing. It would not surprise me if you just see the entire spectrum of actors and that sort of Hollywood and the news and the politicians all just go dark and disappear all in one day. Would not surprise me in the least. But you know what? One thing is about Sri Lanka, they are into the biggest food riots and government protests and unbelievable rioting over there in Sri Lanka, in addition to Peru. But Sri Lanka is off the hook at the moment. Really, I mean, it's to the point of being a failed state right now. About a year ago, they wanted to move to 100% organic agriculture for the country. And again, the obeyer, it sounds all good, but the leaders of the country said, yes, we must do this. And they all did their part, and they brought them right up to 100% agricultural production, no more chemical fertilizers, nothing, no more pesticides, herbicides. It's all got to be organic, whatever you do. But again, it was the government who pushed it, and all those people in power to push that narrative and push that agenda, push those laws forward where everybody had to obey to it. And now we sit today where their agriculture collapsed 50%, 50. In some places, it was even higher. If you want to do an average 35, in the very best cases and you got to understand this, the best places that were in Sri Lanka that had the heads of those organizations that were creating the organic fertilizer in the villages to then disperse to other villages were only losing 35% of their crops. Then you had just the average person out there who was in the periphery that was still part of the program that was getting deliveries from these quote unquote homemade fertilizers, homemade pesticides, organic pesticides delivered to them. They were losing 50%. But at the place where they're testing all this and growing it, they should be losing zero, because they should be the experts on this subject, to the point where they should be producing 110%, 120%. You're saying that the tech's going to work, then it should be 20, 30% over the average what we're doing right now with chemical. I'm not a fan of chemical, but I'm just saying the way it was working in Sri Lanka, they were selling it, everything organic. Okay, we'll bring the practices to get higher yields. Because now they're in the most massive riots where the government has collapsed. Everybody's resigned, and they fled. It's exactly what you talked about, Ransom, but they did it this time with food and the production of food for the people. Now, how mean and nefarious is that? They starved them by doing. They were told to starve the country, do the thing organic, and then run. And they have all run, and they left the country like that. That's some dark energy right there. That's truly dark. What happened in Sri Lanka?
I don't think that those things are that far out for a country like ours to deal with. Even looking at this article that you sent me over about Russia. The grain union wants to switch to export payments to rubles. I've seen several articles like that, but then at the same time, you have all of these rich oligarchs from Russia leaving. Here on Drudge Report, they're talking about, they're moving their crypto around so that no one can find it. They're moving their super yachts over to Turkey. They're doing all of these moves where it almost looks like the Russian government may, pull something similar where everybody just retires or quits or resigns and they run off, leaving everything in shambles. And this all works into the benefit of like Klaus Schwab and all of these other people that want a great reset. That's exactly what they're getting. They're getting that in the countries. I mean, if you just take the United States, for example, in the past, I'm going to say 5 years, there's been so much political turmoil, and the way that they no longer respect laws and they just kind of do whatever they want shows you that we're kind of on a verge of at least a restructuring of government. And I don't think that they're going to be going in the direction that most people want it to. It seems like that they have enough Marxist agents, in my opinion, that's what they are, that they can go ahead and allow, the risk of switching the government over to that without them hurting too much, because the people that are setting it up have been swindling all the resources, for the last 5 years while everyone's distracted with the great reset of culture. And they're using culture as so much of a weapon. You can go to a number of websites on the internet, and they're they're pro-Russian, and they're exactly opposite of the other propaganda. So it's hard for people to know which way things are being in reality.
And the oligarchs wouldn't need to move their crypto if they had private wallets. Never keep your coins on an exchange. David Dubai and Ransom Godwin, famous films. Right here, Revolution Radio, Studio A, freedomslips.com, 10 p.m. to midnight.
You're listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. We'll be right back after this message.
This is Thomas, a.k.a. a Mad Painter. I'd like you to join me Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern Standard Time for Open Canvas. Don't forget to bring an open mind.
Yes, folks, that's right. Bring an open mind to an open canvas. Again, that is Monday nights, 10 p.m. Eastern. UFOs to government corruption. This is Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. You don't need to expect us. We're already here.
Interested in the paranormal, murder mystery, real natural law? You enjoy interviews with amazing guests? Then join Crypt Rick every Monday night, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Revolution Radio. Studio A, freedomslips.com. Crypt Rick's I've been thinking. Welcome to the Crypt.
Join me at Revolution Radio, Studio B, at 11 a.m. on Saturday for Free Association, when we take a look at philosophy, spirituality, psychology, social issues, and geopolitics. That's every Saturday at 11 a.m. Eastern on Studio B at freedomslips.com.
Enter into a world unseen on Raven Star's Witching Hour. You will encounter eclectic topics from the realm of spirit.
And that's right here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com, Saturdays, midnight till 2 a.m. Eastern Time. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps.
Let the magic rise.
Galactic Inter paradigm, as expressed in the time-space continuum that we know as the divine expression of love and light. Integrating this conscious unity into the galactic paradigm. So welcome all, both terrestrial beings and galactic beings as one. So be it. You're listening to Revolution Radio.
Thank you for listening to Revolution Radio at freedomslips.com. Any commercial advertising you may hear in this program is of the sole discretion and benefit of the host of whose program you are listening to. Revolution Radio does not endorse any commercial products, nor does it accept monetary compensation for on-air advertising of commercial products, nor will it ever. We are and shall remain 100% listener supported. Any product advertising on this program are considered used at higher risk, and Revolution Radio shall not be held liable for any claims or damages received from any product advertised within this program. Revolution Radio, where information never sleeps. All right, thanks for listening while we took that short break here at Revolution Radio, freedomslips.com. And now we're going to get back to your host.
And welcome back for the second hour. Freedomist Films. Free speech. We're also broadcasting on Rumble. We're going to be moving to more free speech platform only. And think about Revolution Radio. Freedomslips.com, revolution.radio. You know, this is where the broadcast originates from. So if you appreciate free speech, like we do and so many others today, looking for true information and comparing ideas about what's happening in our society, and you see, you know, so many avenues being cut off for that discussion, which is ridiculous in my opinion. Like, how can you stop? Why stop a conversation? Its own merits will validate it or not. So I'm a fan of free speech because I have a lot of ideas that I'd like to share. So, you know, look at these all across the airwaves as we're trying to get in and go across multiple platforms. Rumble, Odyssey, BitChute, Revolution Radio, you know, the list does go on. So how do we keep Revolution Radio on air? Think about donation. Right at the top, freedomslips.com or revolution.radio, production costs. Like we have production costs too, moving on to other platforms. It's all the same. If you want to keep the information flowing, people need money to do such a thing. So thanks for listening through the first hour. And here we go on the second hour, many Ice Age conversations, Revolution Radio and Rumble tonight streaming. Facts of gold confiscation. I know everybody's thinking about gold and silver. And if you're not, you might want to be. And I was looking at an article today saying that a lot of places online now, you have to pay somewhere $10 to $18 over the spot price to get American Eagle silver coins, 1 ounce rounds. So it brings me up to the point here, gold confiscation, history, will it repeat itself? So back in the 1930s, remember that gold was confiscated and government sanctioned money, and you weren't even allowed to own more than a couple ounces all the way through the 1970s when it finally went off the gold standard. And you couldn't redeem that one paper note, whatever it was, for that exact amount of gold from a bank. Like you could do that for such a long time, but they went off of that standard here in the States, and then we just started printing money. But thinking about holding metals to, let's say, survive the hyperinflation, which is inbound, two things are going to happen. As this article is alluding to here on Zero Hedge, Facts of Gold Confiscation, saga continues. They're either going to confiscate or they're not. And if they do confiscate, the way to hide from that is numismatic gold coins. Anything older than 1930s is considered an extremely rare coin. And you'd have to look maybe the 1940s, pre-World War II. But any of those coins pre-33, I think it is exactly 1933, they cannot confiscate because it's considered numismatic or like a collector gold coin. It's not bullion. And the same thing with silver, I think, would apply too if they're going to confiscate silver, but maybe they're not. It's more of an industrial metal as well as a money in itself, but there's many more uses for it. So gold is, well, that's money. Always has been. That's a way to store the money. And then Bitcoin as well, giving a run with the gold here. And, Peter Thiel was looking for valuations of something 110x above what the price of Bitcoin is now if it comes to parity with the rest of the market. So what about the money? How are you going to be able to buy things during this time should be the question that you're going to think about. Where's the money going to come from? The American money is not going to be worth as much moving forward every single day from now. Every month you're going to notice it because it'll have less value compared to new monies that are coming that actually have, just like we used to do. You could go in and you can take this piece of paper and trade it for this much gold over the counter. That's exactly what's happening again across the planet, not in the Western hemisphere though. Western-backed nations are not doing that, but the others are. They're coming to the point where it's always this price. You bring this many rubles in here, you can get an ounce of gold at any time, ever. Bring your paper, we'll give you the gold right over the counter. That does not happen anymore in Western nations. It did, but it doesn't anymore. So imagine the advantage or how advantageous have how you can store your money. You can hold your money in metals. So if the paper dollar moves or the money hyperinflates, you're still holding the same piece of metal. It's just the exchange value against that metal. You're going to get more pieces of paper. I don't know. And Ransom, that last thing you said about oligarchs are trying to move their crypto around the planet, that means they got crypto on a lot of exchanges, because if you have that much, you want to keep it on your private wallet so it can't be confiscated. So even if the EU was we're going to confiscate this guy's crypto, well, you can't if you had it on a private wallet, And Monero would be another pirate chain too. Those two are good calls for me to be anonymity coins, because imagine if you're holding $100 million worth of Monero, you can't. That's free gold too, but in a digital form.
Yeah, I'm kind of really wondering, because I have all these Mercury dimes and stuff like that. How many people are going to be savvy enough to know that that's still going to be money later, no matter what money there is? Like,
everybody who wants to trade.
Yeah, so if I have a bunch of these dimes, like how much food can I buy for a couple dimes? Well, it might be quite a bit, because people are going to start hoarding the silver and the gold items like you can't believe. Like, you could see a trend whenever the economy is doing really bad. If you look at the pawn shops and how much they're taking in as far as jewelry and stuff, because they're melting all that back down. It's going back into the system. And this article from Zero Hedge about the Europeans trying to block Russians, that doesn't make any sense to me, because what they're blocking is just the refineries that melted into shapes and stuff. So that doesn't. Why would you try to make Russia hold on to gold, for one? That doesn't make any sense to me. And the only reason I can see that they're doing stuff like this is to try to block commerce in different ways. And it seems to me, I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I've been paying attention to the Russian money, and it's actually gaining wealth right now because of all of these sanctions that are being put against it. And people are making new deals, dealing in rubles. And the more business is done in rubles, the more it's worth. So how is this working? I mean, how are we punishing Putin by doing these kind of things? And it tells me that it has nothing to do with actual sanctions or anything. It's just a lot of people are moving around gold and crypto and financial assets all over the world because they're all trying to line up to the new boundaries and the new rules that they know are coming. Because a lot of these people are on a higher echelon than we are, and they get warned. You can think of this is kind of far out there, but you remember the Congress guy out in California that was saying, they told me not to fly today, so I didn't fly, and that just happened to line up with some other stuff that was happening. I think they get phone calls like this all the time, and that's why they've protected themselves from being prosecuted with insider trading, because they're doing a lot of this right now. And I don't even think that there's as much gold, physical gold out there as there is of those little notes that some of the companies buy, where you supposedly have this much gold, but you really only get a paper. So you don't own it. And the only value that a gold or silver or anything that you're saving has really is to have it in person, for real, in your hand. Otherwise, how can you trade it? Because if the entire economy went up, who's to prove that you owned what gold, and how do you know that anybody's going to honor any kind of certificates or stocks or whatever it is that says you own said physical gold? You just don't have it. I don't have a lot of gold. I've been looking into, every time I get a chance, I get a little silver, because that's something I can have right here. And I know that it'll be valuable no matter what happens government wise.
I'm glad you brought up silver, because it's probably going to increase more than gold will in terms of percentage wise. You could look at $1,200 per ounce silver coming up, possibly higher. Depends how much it goes up into hyperinflation after the dollar's disused. But think about, like you said, using the 1922 Mercury dimes, like, who was his silver identifier? Because you asked the question, who would even know what that is for money? Well, I'm going to answer the question, anybody who barters, anybody. So to be an expert on knowing what is real or fake silver, or how to identify fake silver bars, packaging, that sort of thing. Like you see the PAMP bars are a lot of forgeries on them. So there's different ways to look at the packaging itself to know if it's been faked or not. Silver test kits, once you identify that it is silver, then you can put a value to it. But I think that would have, it's a skill set, being able to distill alcohol, woodworking, electricians, pipe fitting, this sort of thing, doctors, dentists, test kits to identify what silver is, so you could have money to pay all those other people. Because money, you're still going to have to buy and sell and trade. I mean, it's been like that. What was that account of Bosnia? Was for a year and a half when they were in the siege, and they were able to get nothing basically from the outside world. We were all looking at them like a microscope, like, why don't you help them? Well, that's their own thing. But the recollections of how they lived during that time, because 12 hours before, they were told the peace negotiations were going fine, and then 12 hours later, they're completely locked off from any resupply, and it was a siege on the city. And think about that. The accounts that they went through, that was the first thing, the fresh water. Then everybody started to use the river because they knew it could flush, and they took their stuff out of their house and put it in the river, and then the river became contaminated, and nobody could use that for water source. And it was just a whole story of day one, day two, day three, and then, how people mentally reacted to things getting shut off and not available, and how they dealt with it and how they innovated. Now, eventually, things were lifted some 2 years later, and suddenly supplies ran back in day one, and everybody's like, oh, we got chocolate bars back or whatever. Oh, there's water back. Oh, there's a Band-Aid back. I mean, these most ridiculous things that you take for granted were gone, and they had to deal with it. And the way that they dealt with it was rudimentary at best. I mean, Stone Age at worst. Somewhere in the middle was pretty much your everyday waking life. And, then there was threats of snipers around too when they went to go to trade at markets. But that was the thing. People who knew what the tradable item was could put a value to it. So if you had say you had a 10th ounce round of silver or a quarter ounce round of silver, somebody could be at the market and say, well, how many chickens is this worth? Or how many eggs? Or, how many rounds is this worth? Talking copper rounds. So what's the skill set and the value knowing what real tradable metals are? Because trading ammo for metal, and that was the whole thing. The story went something like this. Silver was the most valuable, and food. Those two could be retraded for anything at all, anything. Silver and food, you could retrade for anything. So if you had a can and you didn't eat it and it was expired and you got like another couple cans for something and you were able to on pass that one, you could trade for silver. But another highly bartered item was the ammo. But see, they weren't firing off the ammo all the time, so they could retrade it back in for food. So maybe you got, a box of 20, 30-06 or something, you didn't use it, and then, because you're not going to be deer hunting in the middle of the city, but they just had it because it was ammo, and it was a store of value too. And you got all these items that just kept flipping and switching back and forth amongst themselves: silver, food, and ammo, and medicine, if you could get it, but that was used up, so you couldn't really barter it back again. I'm talking about things that hold value. Metals, and they didn't have crypto at the time, but now in Venezuela, they're using it. Ammo and food. So if we break it back down into think about the siege in Bosnia, ammo, food, and medicine, or ammo, food, and precious metals, those are what we're going to go back to worldwide again.
And it makes sense. Now, tell me if this is a conspiracy theory, because we've talked in the past about, the South Pacific and all that's going on there between Taiwan, China, and the United States. So we were just talking a minute ago about Nancy Pelosi supposedly, getting the COVID and she's going to be gone and all of this stuff. But then I look over at another article, which is saying China warns strong measures if U.S. Speaker Pelosi visits Taiwan. Now, at the same time as she's supposed to be, disappearing because she's sick, it seems like she has plans to go places. And then I see this article right here: China's security deal with the Solomon Islands raises alarm in the Pacific. Now,
what's that one about? I haven't heard about that one. Fill me in.
Okay, so supposedly they just made a new security agreement between China and the Solomon Islands, and everybody's upset about it because it's so close to, a lot of U.S. military bases around New Zealand, Guam, and Australia. But if you think back to that scenario, what I was talking about is all of this trade goes through these, these waters back and forth from the South Pacific or Southeast Asia, China, and there's all this trade going back and forth. We have trade between Taiwan, Japan, etc. Some of these islands for different foods. So what happens if let's say tensions increase, and what we were talking about before, there's trade routes that are cut off because there's now a new conflict. Well, it's not really a new conflict, but it becomes active there between Taiwan and China, and whether or not the U.S. will back China or just kind of slip away and reduce our reach, I don't think it's going to happen. So when you look at this stuff, you imagine the supply chain on things like fish, tuna, and how many people are going around and all happy about getting their omegas and whatnot that they get from all of these products that come out of the ocean. There's plankton, seaweed, and all kinds of products that they make from things that they get out of the ocean. And you can imagine all of these industries shutting down overnight, and then trade disputes, fishing disputes, all in the Pacific area, where the United States, Russia, and China all have major fishing fleets out there. You can see how this could turn into more basically starvation for lots of countries that depend on these trade deals that involve just-in-time shipping, because none of these places are actually keeping stock on hand. They just wait for the next shipment. They put it out. People get it. It's gone. And when the shipments stop coming, you can see big holes in the grocery stores. And then you start adding it with the grain and the gasoline, and you can just see all of these major holes showing up in the economy when it comes to food, energy, and it has to come to a head. So I'm thinking, where was that it was the Bikini Islands, right, that we blew up. But how much would that affect the world if we had a nuclear outbreak between island nations? It really wouldn't affect much. However, you could see the propaganda being used to tell you that that's why nothing can be shipped anywhere, because we have wars on two sides of the planet. And then, of course, Russia would be involved also in the Pacific, because, they have a lot of coastline there, too. So strange times indeed. But how do you think this is all going to pan out as far as trade deals that have been built over decades of time? Do you think they're just going to crush all these trade deals and make new ones that go more along with their one world government and their Great Reset? And this also puts them in position to decide who eats and who doesn't eat.
Well, yes, everything in the world right now, everything's being revalued. Why do you think this is all occurring? This is on purpose. Because you ask, they can't deliver gold. Oh, they're locking the gold in. Well, the onward effect is crashing the London Bullion Metals Exchange. Because I think there were 5 different bullion dealers that delivered, they call it good delivery, that they've already been vetted, and yes, their purities, exactly what it says, and the weights are on the money, never even a milligram short. It's always the weights that are the weights, the measures, and the purity is always essayed at perfection. So then they could say, yes, we'll give it to the London Bullion Metals Exchange. So if Ransom has a contract for, 10 1,000-ounce bars of gold or whatever, he can take physical delivery of that. And we know that those people smelting that and refining that and mining it, they're trustworthy because their assay is perfect. That's what's called good delivery for the COMEX and the London Bullion Metals Exchange. But see, people are taking physical delivery now on those paper contracts. And to say Russia can't deliver, well, wait a second. There's more takers on the side for gold and silver right now than there are physical deliveries into the vaults right now. Not only COMEX in the United States, but also in London. The amount of transition over to delivered contracts is ridiculous and has outstripped already. We're now JP Morgan sending, emergency shipments of silver into the vault so it can meet the pull, which is when people come in and they take their physical delivery out of that. So it doesn't appear that there's a shortage. There's always enough central bank or, private bank gold or silver to still flow in just to meet the contracts that are being physically delivered right now. But, it looks like that's running out. They were pulling like 70 million ounces of silver out, and, they ran out of the 1,000-ounce bars. And that's exactly to speed up the collapse. Because once those two markets break, and this is the little secret, distant early warning of things you're going to look for when the collapse starts and you understand it started, when the London Bullion Metals Exchange or COMEX or one of those two closes down because they can't fulfill orders on the precious metals side, this is when the game is over. Forget the nickel and the tin, and I think zinc will be next for this super, rises. Before it was nickel, I think we're going to move to zinc and cobalt, those kind of thing. But that's just the metals that we need for business and manufacturing. If it comes down to precious metals and either of those delivery houses closes because they can't fulfill orders on the metals, the economy has truly collapsed. And that's the mechanism that holds the economy together. And you said, what about ocean products? Well, if I could comment on ocean products for a second. A lot of those oils, those omega oils and the things you talked about, some seaweed, that's quote unquote superfoods, right? Well, you and I both understand that whole supply chain is going to cease. And I already get that. It's ceasing. So that's why I have 8 new mulberry trees on my property. Gynura. Moringa oleifera seeds. Everybody should have at least 1,000 Moringa oleifera seeds. You can grow them once per year in, the warmest of the months, and you can harvest all that leaf and powderize it and save it. It is a superfood. So you need to start thinking about superfoods. So if the whole ocean products cuts off and stops, then what's the replacement to have superfood and micronutrients that we need to keep our bodies functioning? Well, mulberry leaf is another superfood that you could grind into a powder and keep it for a longer period of time in your freezer. And then you always have access to good nutrition, smoothies and green. What about chlorophyll? Well, then you need to go, what's wild forageable right now where you can go out? The leaves are incredibly supple. Everything coming out in spring is so supple that you can there's no hardness to it. It's all like a very soft vegetable. So which of those trees can you go? Well, if you're in the tropics, mango, for an example. But what about your local area? So you got to think of replacements for things. What are you looking at for replacement of ocean products? If that protein from the fish, as you mentioned, goes away and we can't get cans of tuna, then what? Well, people are going to shift to chicken, and that'll sell out in like 1/5 of an 1/8 of a second, and then the beef, and then the pork, and then anything that's in the meat counter will be gone in like 1/10 of a second after that. So then what happens? Are we going to transition from the canned fish? I mean, I looked at some oil prices in terms of cooking oil. I could not believe this was in Germany. The price of cooking oil was €38.50 for a 2.5 gallon like plastic jug of sunflower oil. Ridiculous price, $38.50. That's like you can't cook. You use one too many teaspoons. Stop. You just broke the budget. It's that kind of value on a 2.5 gallon tub of our bottle of cooking oil. So where are we going from here then? What can you substitute for cooking oil? That's a hard substitute.
Only thing I know of is lard, and you'd have to know how to chop that up and save it and boil it down and make it. I'm really curious about the main way. Like, if they're just say you cannot get meat. Let's say that the hunting is just a no-go. People have overhunted, and there's just not much in the time right after things kind of start slowing down, economy shutting down. There's not much of anything. A lot of people think they're just going to rely on hunting, but it's easier said than done. So what is something that you know of that you could stockpile as far as a protein supplement, I guess you would say, because you have to have protein. There's no doubt about it. And for you to even think clearly, you're going to have some kind of cholesterol. So if you're not stockpiling butter and lard and different things like that, what's a way around that? I know there's beans and lentils and stuff like that, but somebody can only really eat so many vegetables before it drives them insane. You got to have some kind of animal product with your storage. So what's the best way to go about that besides storing lard? Like what is there that you could just have kind of like a plant-based protein powder, or like there's big hardcore superfood vitamin powders that you could have. You're still going to need to be eating fiber and all of that stuff with your vegetables to have something on your stomach. But how do you get around not having animal products? Is there a good way that you know
of? Raise your own. I mean, that's easier said than done, but when it comes down to it, if the supply stops from, another state, another country, well, if you could produce that at home, then that's the way you're going to look, because, a lot of our neighbors out here, they have breeding cares of cattle, and that's all they do is they breed the calves, and then they raise the calves, and then they sell those. And it's kind of like a stream of, well, they have the same cattle that have been together for a while, and they just keep producing calves, and that's what they're selling. They never sell the producing cattle that they have. It's always they're selling the calves after they raise it, and it goes into a different part of the field, and that's the whole thing. After it gets off the mother, it goes into a different part of the field, and that's what they're doing. And one of our neighbors does goats. He raises goats, and he and his wife, they sell the goats at auction afterward. And the same with chickens. I haven't seen anybody doing rabbits out here because everybody's really angry at the rabbits because, rabbits are very dangerous for your produce. Like, if you bring rabbits out on the property, if people see you raising rabbits, they are going to be angry or come in and take those rabbits out because that means their gardens disappear because of rabbits. So for you to bring rabbits back into the countryside, they're like, no, I can't believe you're bringing the pest back in here, because it's taken so long to eradicate them where they actually get gardens without so many bunnies eating everything. So how many different animals can you raise to then get that fat, and how valuable would it be? Because if you go back in history and you start looking over, in Western Africa and Timbuktu, when they were bringing through with the salt routes and sort of thing, where salt was more valuable than its weight in gold, or equal value, where, a kilogram of salt was equal to a kilogram of gold, if you can believe that. That's how valuable it was. Think about going on the fats. Like, what's the value of fat going to be to silver or gold if it's going to keep you alive like salt does? Worth is salt was a quick saying that came out of the Roman Empire. Again, a day's wage for, you could take the physical delivery of salt from a salt mine, or you could take the equivalent in grain, or you could take the equivalent in silver. So again, those were all exchangeable in the Roman Empire for the soldiers working at the time, or those at higher level that were taking, quote unquote, salary. So think about what the value is, where you could exchange those. If you're looking at salts, now we're going to put in their oils, grains, metals. I mean, we're just repeating history again. This is a once in a 2,000-year cycle. So when I look back and I say you could trade salts, grains, or silver amongst each other as a day's wage, and you choose what it was as the soldier, I see we're going to probably go back to something similar. Now, we're probably going to need to add in some oils on top of that, and we're going to need to raise our own animals to have the fats. Long answer, but maybe that's it.
Yeah. I recently visited Carlsbad Caverns, and they have a whole display there that talks about how the Apache thought it was a holy place, not because of the giant caverns or nothing, because they didn't really explore too much into that, but they would go near these limestone caves, and they would find these pillars of salt that you could carve out of the side of the wall, and then there's like little flats, and it shows you like without that salt supply there would have been no civilization in this area, like to speak of. And they talk about how holy it is because the salt is the essence of life, along with water. There's one thing that I bet a lot of people don't think of when they start supplying stuff. That I knew people when I was a kid that lived in the rural Arkansas that literally only traveled to town to buy big bags of salt, and then they would go back to their property, and they probably wouldn't even come back to town for 2 or 3 years. And who's really saves salt like that? I know probably hoarders have a bunch of salt, but when you're stocking all of these storable foods and all of your supplies, that's one important thing that you're not going to be able to live without, is a supply of salt, because you can't sweat, you'll start getting sick. You imagine trying to run a farm or a ranch with no electricity and all of these things, and you also don't have salt. People are going to start getting sick. And if you remember back in the 20s, before they even started adding or re-adding, I should say, iodine to the salt, people were getting all these goiters and different things, and they were having health problems because of the lack of trace minerals that they were getting through the salt. So you could imagine that if you were going to try to survive for some time, salt would be one of those major, key components to anything that you're going to do. You're not going to be able to cook your foods really and have it as appetizing as it normally would. And just think about the psychological effect of being able to season your foods where it tastes good when there's not times of plenty. I mean, I know my grandparents and people like that knew the importance of salt, and they also did the lard thing. Like, there was always a jar or two of lard just sitting around, either that they poured off grease and saved it, or they just cut it down and boiled it and made lard. These are some of the things that people just take for granted, and some of the main things that you would have to think about that. If you just now started stockpiling stuff, and you're talking about a $30 or a €30 gallon of oil, That's not really cost efficient, or it's not going to last. So where do you get these things? You're going to have to start producing them and stockpiling stuff. I'm kind of glad you brought up salt, because I think that's something that a lot of people just don't think of. And if you're going to learn how to salt meats or any of that stuff, obviously you need a supply of real salt. There's all of these other things that I know that people are going to forget. There's a number of trace minerals that you just absolutely need. And if you're not growing the right stuff and you don't have a little bit of animal content and you don't have these trace minerals, you start to get sick, even though you might think that you have an abundance of stuff. So those are some really important things to look at if you're planning for long-term sustainability for yourself or your family.
Okay, I have to wonder if people are not going to have seaweeds or something to give them an iodine source. Let's say all that, like you say, ocean product ceases. People are still going to need to find iodine some way. So I know iodized salt, if you're using it too much, you're right, there's going to be health problems with that. But I would say to have, 1 or 2 pounds of that to occasionally use to give you that iodine that you need. And then you got the sea salt and the Himalayan salt. So would it not behoove you to have 3 types of salt around? Because, Ransom, let me ask you a real question here. So let's say we were sitting across from each other and I said, we're down the road where things are incredibly expensive, things aren't available in supermarkets, there's failures everywhere, food's hard to get, and we finally do come to the time that, salt does have more value because it can do quite a few tasks. So if I had 1 pound of salt, I mean, really, what's the value going to be in terms of silver at that time? Is it going to be 1 ounce of silver for 1 pound of salt? 1/4 ounce of silver? Who has a 1/10 ounce of silver? Are you going to sit there with somebody with a pocket knife or a pair of pliers or wire cutters and then go through that? Tin snips? Are you're going to carry your own tin snips with you so you can cut through the coin and then cut off 1/4 of it and then try to weigh it on a scale for the amount of salt? I mean, really, if you're going to, and here's my last thing. I don't know if, salting meat or salting fish, obviously there's an enormous amount of salt on the top of that after you finish with it. And you're never going to waste that salt. So, are the recipes, or how can you recycle the salt after you salt meat? I guess is the ultimate question. So what's the price of silver, and can you reuse salt after you salt meat or fish?
I would think you'd be able to reuse the salt. You can save it, for stews and soups and all kinds of other things that you're going to cook really good and thoroughly. So there's no problem of you getting sick. I don't see why you couldn't save the salt for broths and other things. That is a good question, is the barter system. Food, when you don't have it, is basically its weight in gold. And I know a lot of people have heard that saying, but any of these things, ammo, silver, food, medicine, when there's a necessity for them, they become essentially gold themselves. So I don't know how it's actually going to play out as far as the money, but I do see strong indications that they're about to pull the plug on the American petrodollar. I see signs of it everywhere. And people have been talking about Keynesian economics for a long time, and talking about how we should have been, more on that idea. Instead, we've been using this fiat system that is bound to collapse. And now we're seeing all of the right signs and the correct situations for them to pull the plug on it. And there's no shortage of articles talking about these countries wanting to all go over to this digital system, even cryptos coming from governments. And you got to realize that these are the people that hold all the power. And yes, you can use those things to buy, but physical things that you have are, just like I said, they're weight in gold if you have them. If you don't have them, imagine, all the trouble you have to go through. What are you going to have to trade off to get these necessities if you didn't already have them? And I know people that make coleslaw and stuff like that, they know all about the salt and they store salt. But a lot of people that are, new to trying to look into the future, they're not thinking about all of these little corners that they could cut that, just a few decades ago, even, maybe even 100 years ago, was standard practice in almost every house. And they knew all of it. We have to relearn every bit of the old knowledge, and there's plenty of books out there, but we also have to start using these new technological shortcuts that have been showing themselves to permaculture. There's better ways to make beds. There's better ways to, do your water. There's all kinds of these new innovative things. The other day, I actually drove by a house, and this is the first time I've seen something like this in the public. But their house is buried, but on top of it, they have one of those woodifiers that I brought up a couple times, and it seems like that's what they're heating and powering their house with, just one of those outside. They look like the type that are probably prepping. They had an entire trailer kind of built underground, and then they have these things sticking up on the top. And I noticed that with just a little bit of brush growing up, you could barely even notice someone was living there. And, you might want to even think about that kind of stuff if you live in certain areas, is trying to camouflage things that are useful on your property, not just the food, but everything else. I took a walk out with my son the other day, and I was showing him all the plants that we're not necessarily trying to grow, but if push came to shove, I know exactly where to go find pounds and pounds of edible foods. And like you were talking about, the suppleness of the vegetables at this time of year, all of these lettuces that I didn't even plant, they're just volunteers from the seeds blowing everywhere. They're popping up everywhere. And once you establish that on your property, like there's clover and there's all of these other things that are now growing on my property that I can eat. They may not taste good. I even recently found out, because I'm a big hollyhock fan and I've been growing hollyhocks for a really long time, you can eat that entire plant, flower, stalk, roots. So there's all of these disguised ways of backup. It's a backup, having all these things. It's not something that you're going to want to go eat. Like, I'm not trying to go out and eat a barrage, hollyhock salad or anything. It'd probably not taste that good. But imagine having only these choices of plants and not having salt and not having the animal fats to try to make meals. It seems like, that would be a horrible way of living, actually.
Caterpillar oil. Now, you said something interesting there, boil for hours and hours, but if you really want to get rid of most of the bacterias and botulism and things that will make you sick out of, say, your homemade canned jar, they recommend boiling it for 8 minutes, like a super roaring boil. And even if there is botulism in it, it'll nullify the bacteria. The botulism spores will still be in there, but the ability to make you sick will become inert when you're boiling that. And you're right. What is the thing about camouflage too? How much are people really going to go out into the countryside and explore? And I had this conversation with a couple of my neighbors. Okay, so if people empty out of a city near us, Knoxville, there's 400,000 people up there, but we're an hour and a half away from it. So how exploratory will people become out of there? Because an hour and a half to come down and turn left down this road, turn down this road, go to the back thing there, turn at this T-junction, and then find your way up a huge gravel driveway up into a forest, and then find something up there. I mean, do you think people would stumble across your property just like once in a thousand, one in a thousand, one in a million? Well, 1 in 1,000 chance means 400 people. At a city of 400,000, you go, it's a once in 1,000 chance anybody will find your property up there. Well, there's 400,000 people that live up there, so that's 400 possible visits. So how do you disguise? I don't know. There's a lot of things to move forward, and that oils, it is going to be about the nutrition, but how do you get oil? I would say some nuts, but you're waiting until harvest season in the Northern Hemisphere anyway, if you're going to be looking for hickory nut, and then that takes a long time to clean to get any food out of it. And you got walnuts for sure, and we know those, black walnuts. And then chestnuts, that could be something. You could, and acorns, but I don't know. I've tried a few acorns in my day. They're really bitter. It's hard to get rid of them. Soaking them in water for 3 days. And see, it comes down to it. If you're in a survival situation, are you going to soak an acorn in water for 3 days to try to eat it? Or are you going to move to a different food source that's not so commodity intensive, because water could be precious at that time. So the nuts will arrive. Oh, and let's see, hazelnuts. That's another good one. And hazelnut might be, because they make hazelnut oil, but they make oil from everything I just talked about with the nuts. On a commercial level, it's walnut, hazelnut, although it's harder to find in those oils. But you're still going to find a huge amount of oils coming in at the harvest season. And I don't know if it's nature's way to drop a bunch of oils so the deer and the raccoon and the fox and all these other can stay alive during the winter, birds, everything, bears, that they have a huge energy source to take them through the winter where they get a huge boost of oils coming into the cooler time, coming into fall. They get a huge boost of oils naturally from all these nut trees dropping. During the summer, it's carbohydrates like the rootstock you're talking about, but you could find oils, but then again, how are you going to store that? I guess if you're inside for the whole winter with your family, you could process a ton of walnuts to then create that oil or powderize it, or you're going to have to preserve it somehow too. It's great that you might find the oils and come across a massive oil source of fish oils or some kind of nut oils, but you're going to have to preserve that. So what are the old school methods of preserving nuts that you found from the harvest season all the way through the next year into the lean times again?
Your question about how many people would come from a city and look around, and it immediately made me think of these migrants that are coming in big groups. And when you think about that, they're just coming here for the promise of a slightly better life. So you can imagine that if they would walk halfway across the planet for just a little bit of extra stuff, imagine what the people are going to be doing when they actually have massive amounts of starving people and they don't know where to go. People are pretty ingenuitive. They have ingenuity, and I think that they will be combing the land, and the only thing stopping them from finding you is the other people in between you and them. So I hate to say this, but you also have to think about what do your neighbors have, the properties around you, what do they have? And what kind of barriers are there in between where you're at? I'm sure if you live in a specific spot, the terrain just won't allow people to just stumble across your place. However, if they're looking for it, they may find it, especially if you're the type of people that have the nice ranches and farms that are on highway frontage or near the roads and stuff like that. But if you kind of compare those scenarios, people are willing to migrate halfway across the planet for just a little bit of an idea of a better life. So if they're already hungry, and we're talking just local people that are there, imagine how far they'll migrate to get resources. And I think that's pretty far. And I think that's a pretty serious topic that's going to have to be dealt with if there is any kind of societal collapse of any kind. I believe people will pull together at first. And they'll kind of show their humanity. But then if it drags on for a long time, we've kind of seen where that goes, and it's not a pretty place. I do know that, if you're cutting up animals of any kind, whether you're hunting or you have some, that the bone marrow in there can be dried and it turns into a grease-like substance that you can also cook with, plus it's high in protein. I just thought I would add that in there. I've done experiments where we've gone out into the wilderness where I've looked for bones of animals that you could crack apart and find bone marrow in it. And I've had some success, and you can actually use that and cook with that. Like you were talking about, you're going to have to extremely get it to a high heat to make sure you're not getting sick from anything that might be growing in it, though.
Yeah, that's why they used to add spices to the foods in the Caribbean nations, because sometimes the food went bad, but they still cooked the meat, boil it long enough to kill the bacteria, but sometimes you can't remove the taste. And that's where chili peppers come in, or spices. Food's still safe to eat, but that's why you go to some nations that are just incredibly hot, spicy food. Well, that's the reason, because you can still eat foods even though they've spoiled, boil it, tastes terrible, killed the bacteria, now mask the taste. Okay, it's an order. I'll tell you a personal story here about ginseng bandits that just came through our area here. Speaking of people walking across properties and going into unknown destinations. Again, the person I bought the eggs from, about a mile down from my place here, their dogs. They have a few dogs that are like hunting, tracking dogs. Well, they were just out in the yard and then suddenly started chasing something up in the forest. And, she went up there and was like, what is going on? Why are all the dogs making so much ruckus and pointing here? And well, they had surrounded a ginseng bandit. Now, wild ginseng in East Tennessee is incredibly valuable. I mean, incredibly valuable. So you have people that walk through the forest and illegally harvest it. They're called ginseng bandits, but they walk through the forest, and apparently they were dropped off right on our property or down near here somewhere. And they walked more than a mile through the forest just harvesting everybody's ginseng that was naturally growing on their property. Before the dogs caught them, she said she called the sheriff, but it took them about 30 minutes to get out to the house. And by that time, the person had run off, jumped in a car, and gotten away. No cameras out here, which is a good thing, but it still took forever for a sheriff to get out. So think about the Old West. Go back into the 1850s again. You're kind of on your own for security, because if that person would have become aggressive, then what do? 30 minutes till the sheriff arrives, tick-tock, tick-tock. It's the same thing. People walking through the forest that get caught stealing something are not going to be too happy. But because there were 3 dogs versus just a single person, it was quite the different scenario going on, where that person was scared because their dogs are big. They got like 70, 80-pound Catahoula, like super hunting dogs and stuff. Whoa. But you think of all the mechanics that are going through. I mean, this is like now people coming through the forest just digging things that are wild growing. So I don't know. Yeah, you're right. There's probably going to be a lot of intrusion across property that you thought would never be there.
So you're telling me there's ginseng bandits, we got gasoline bandits, and when you were saying that whole thing, I was thinking about all of these new food services, because they're, going back into this like digital ID system that some people are going to be using after the reset. They already have it set up where, the phones order your food and it comes up. And I just started thinking of that movie Demolition Man. If people will steal your ginseng right out of your yard and your garden, they'll take fruits and vegetables, and they'll steal an animal. There's lots of cases of people just stealing like dogs because they're, valuable. Imagine them stealing your livestock. And then on top of that, the people that are trying to live in the cities, they're worried about people stealing their Amazon packages. Wait till the guy that's delivering your burritos is getting held up outside because people are hungry. You could just imagine how that's not going to go well with all of these drivers. So they're not going to want to deal with the high crime. And then guess what? You have all of these systems already set up to get rid of the drivers, get rid of the delivers, and we'll just have the robots. And if you remember, what was that? 2 years ago, they displayed their new little robot in San Francisco that was going around trying to tell people things, kind of like the little dog with the speaker in China. However, the response to that robot in San Francisco was people were smearing feces and, kicking it over and spray painting on it. So it didn't go too well. So you can imagine the future of the idea of these people that think they're going to get these food kits and meals delivered to their home unmolested. That's really, it doesn't even make sense. And I don't think it's going to happen. And mark my words, you're going to see that in the near future, where people are robbing like the little guy, I forgot what the Uber Eats guy and, whatever other companies are out there delivering the food. And then those people aren't going to want to deliver, obviously, after they get robbed a few times for just delivering a sandwich or a burrito.
Well, the Chinese robot dog is nice. And so is the Singapore dog running through the park with a loudspeaker on its head telling everybody to stay 6 feet apart to this day. Those robot dogs are nice, Ransom. And yeah, this brings us back into information that I have here that military is coming into our supermarkets. And military is going out into our farm fields to guard the grain silos this year, coming into the harvest. They're not going to do it now, but as we come into August, you'll see a lot of movement of military out into the food areas that are growing it, where it's consolidated, where it's harvested and then stored. Those are all going to be protected areas. Now, I'm sort of for that, but at the same time, not. Because it's the same thing with the rail lines right now. They're being stopped. And a lot of grain deliveries, even though they had forward contracts for a certain amount of cars to deliver grain to cattle operations, the railroads are calling force majeure, and they're going for a higher price for like Walmart delivered goods, for example. So a lot of the grain's not making it to the cattle. So what kind of world we living in here? Things are going to get, like you say, marauders are going to come out there, but some producers have already been guaranteed protection by the U.S. military with temporary housing if they're allowed to occupy the farm fields. But a majority of that needs to go back to the military. See, that was the whole caveat. So what's going on? Because I was reading some accounts of gardening and victory gardens in the United States when, most of the stuff we grew here was the best stuff was sent to the boys overseas to keep the morale high, to keep the protein high. Everybody had to suffer and scrimp a little bit here, cut way back so the war could go on with feeding the boys overseas. I think we're coming back into something that's similar here right now because that food is being earmarked for troops and government if they protect it. Ransom, glad you joined me tonight, man. Thanks for everybody listening on Rumble as well. Ransom, I'll let you sign off. And until next week, we're going to try to add another live streaming channel, Rumble Crowd. Thank you. Revolution Radio, very solid. And Ransom, take us out for tonight.
All right. Yeah, so if you don't think it's important to save stuff, I would start saving stuff right now and start preparing for at least a short period of tough times coming this winter.
Tough only if you didn't prepare. Thanks for listening. Prepare, grow something this week. Bye for now.
Thank you for listening to Revolution